going to explain to you something which probably you've never seen before, mainly because of the analogy and the example I'm going to use to explain a concept. Most of us, when we look at, so-called accomplishment in life and in people who use Sanskrit words would call it sadhana. Everybody wants to do sadhana, whatever that means, or everybody wants to be accomplished, right? And so they wait 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, whatever, go through a career and then say, what did I accomplish? This is a very common question. Everybody says, what did I accomplish in my life? Well, for us to answer that question, first we need to understand what that means, right? What does that even mean? And what are some other things that affect that? In my definition, at least, when you increase your potential, that is your ability to make things happen, your ability to make energy flow, be it in your own life or people around you or society at large, whatever you may be looking at, to me, that is real accomplishment. Like if when I'm 20 years old, I'm capable and have the potential to do certain things, I have the ability to cause certain things to happen. When I'm 40 years old or 50 years old or 60 years old, if that did not change, if it's always the same, then probably I've been doing the same thing over and over again, and I don't consider that to be an accomplishment. Again, that is my definition, whether you agree with me or not. So based on that definition of accomplishment, which is increasing potential as you go through life, the question is, what are some of these things that affect it, and what is it that I have at my disposal that I can use? If only I understood that clearly, then the chances are that I can be a little bit more effective in the way I do this, and my process itself can be a little bit more scientific, right? So this is where the slightly strange part may come in, which is that I just happen to be an electronics engineer. I've been in this field for over 4 decades. And I also happen to do research and teach in the field of electronics. So my mind naturally goes in that direction. And so I'm going to use that as an example, if you'll bear with me. And even for those people who don't have an electronics background, I'll try to give a very basic description of this analogy that I'm using so that maybe you can catch that. And as a prerequisite to this, if you will, there is a video out there in the YouTube somewhere. If you search under my name, you'll find a video called Man, the MOSFET, MOSFET. That is the starting point for this. So I'm going to take it to the next level, if you will. So when we think of accomplishment, let's break it down a little bit and see how that actually might happen. The first thing that happens, any increase in potential within me has to happen at different levels, isn't it? One is the physical level, and as you know, we have all these 5 sensory organs, and it's interesting to me that some of these organs we have in duplicate and some things we don't, right? I have 2 hands, for example. If I want to touch something, I have 2 hands. If I want to hear something, I have 2 ears. I have 2 eyes. I have only 1 nose, but I have 2 nostrils, but I have only 1 mouth. So as far as the tasting part is concerned, I just have 1 tongue and 1 mouth. What happens is that normally we think that my right ear and my left ear are exactly the same. So it's sort of like a backup, if you will. So if one for some reason stops working, I have the other one. So it is there just to make sure that the chances of both of them failing are far less than one of them failing, and therefore the big engineer with a capital E decided that I'll get 2 ears and 2 nostrils and so on. My thing is, why did it stop there? Why not give me 2 mouths and 2 tongues? But the thing is this, right? When you look at knowledge part, the real knowledge part, what is it that we use? Of these 5 senses, what are the things that we use a lot? For example, I may read a book, I may listen to somebody talking like you're doing right now, listening to me. You may watch me, right? You don't have to come and touch me to understand what I'm saying, or you don't have to come and lick me to taste me. So some of these organs are used much more for certain things. So when we look at this 2 ears, and I look at my 2 eyes and also my 2 hands, by the way, right? Because when I want to do something, after all, I do it with my hands, and there is some feedback in that thing, which we refer to as tactile sensing, the touch sensing is there. Let me stop there for a second, and I'm going to show you a little, sorry for doing this to you, but let me show you a little circuit, if you will. For those of you who are familiar with electronics, hopefully you'll recognize this. There's a very fundamental functional block in electronics that we use. It's called an operational amplifier. It's a very, very fundamental block. Those of us who design the guts of those things know that at a very high level, inside that it is broken up into 3 different things. So here's a little circuit of that, right? So basically what you have here, forget about what I've written at the bottom, I'll come to that in a second, but just look at these triangles and what's written just underneath that thing. So basically what you have is you have 3 actually different amplifiers. Now, before I show that, let me tell you what an amplifier is. As the word says, it amplifies something. And in this particular case, what we're looking at is amplifying the potential, right? So if you take a signal, a voltage, if I pass it through some circuit, and what comes out of it looks exactly like what was put in, except it's much, much bigger, then that's what I call an amplifier. So having said that, let me show you this thing again. So this very first part here, right? This is what we refer to as a differential amplifier. So that particular one has got 2 inputs. Now this is where my 2 ears and my 2 eyes and all that come into the picture, right? No pun intended. So I have 2 inputs here, and what this first one does is it looks at the potential here, subtracts this potential from this one, and whatever the difference is, it will amplify that, it will make it bigger, and that's what shows up here, right there. Okay, what I've called V1. There's a second block. Now, the main idea of the first block is to make the difference bigger, and anything that is common, because this what we refer to as the amplification factor or the gain is the same from here to here and from here to here. It's just that it is positive one side, negative on the other side, that's all, right? So if I apply the same thing to the 2 things, what happens is, well, you get the plus and get the minus, the 2 things should cancel each other out, and you get nothing at the output. That's what we refer to as a common mode. So if you put the same thing on the 2 sides, it should go away, but if there's any difference between the 2, it should get amplified. So that comes over here, okay? Now this part here, the second triangle that I've got, this is normally what we refer to as the high gain stage. That is where a lot of potential increase happens, the potential difference. What I refer to as the voltage is nothing but the potential difference. So this is where the potential actually gets amplified a lot, okay? Now, typically what happens is that also is negative. When we talk about negative potential, what that means is that if the potential goes up here it will go down by much. This will look exactly like this in shape. It's just that it's flipped over. So if this goes up, that comes down, and vice versa, right? This last thing here, that actually doesn't increase the potential. Matter of fact, it drops the potential just a tad. That's what we refer to as an output stage. But what it does is it amplifies the current, which means that energy, a lot more energy can flow here, okay? So let's sort of summarize these 3 parts. I'll sort of come back to the human factor here in just a second. So the first part gets rid of anything that's common, just takes, nothing happens. It takes the difference between the two things, brings it, makes it a little bigger, brings it over here, and this part here takes whatever is here, that potential, and makes it much, much bigger at this point, but it gets flipped over. And this last thing, it takes whatever is here, this potential, and this potential at at the output of at the last stage at the output is the same as this, pretty much, maybe a tad smaller, but this has the capacity to give a lot of energy. Okay. Now, one more thing I have to explain to you, then we'll come back to the human being. So this thing, what I've shown here is called a capacitor. And basically what that does is when you try to put charge through that, it keeps it for itself. Okay, that's basically what it does. So, like if a human being, if you translate it to a person, if somebody grabs and keeps everything for himself, that's what this is, right? And this is what we refer to as the load, and we refer to this as the compensation capacitance. So this is connected between these 2 points, okay? Now, I'm going to put this thing aside, and now I'm going to talk a little bit. So if you look at a human being, right? Let's look at a little bit of what's going on here. So what happens is, I have 2 hands, right? And I do things with both my hands, I use both my hands. But if you're a right-handed person, then you tend to use your right hand a lot. So when you do things, you tend to do this. The question is, why is this there then? Is it just a backup hand, or is it for some... No, I sort of use it. Suppose I want to, let's say, I want to put sugar in my cup of coffee and stir it. What do? I probably hold the cup in my left hand, I put the sugar, and with my right hand I stir it, right? So the second one is used as a support system, and also to get feedback to the system, right? Having said that, when information comes into me, right? Not knowledge or wisdom, but information comes into me. This is gathered either by listening to something, or looking at something, reading something, right? And that is coming in. And the thing is that when this information comes in, if there's something common, if I'm going to use feedback in the system. So we do this all the time in life, right? So we do something, we see how it goes. And if that thing goes well, we make adjustments, we calibrate things in life, and so we alter things and so on. That's what I refer to as a feedback, right? So when you have 2 inputs, like you do in this particular case, a lot of times what we do is our input is actually coming in here. This input we use actually for feedback. So we sample what's going on here right at the output and bring it back here and put it in here so that it gets subtracted from this, right? So that's used for calibration. We do the same thing. Even human beings, we do this all the time. We look at what's going on, we look at the outcome, we sample the outcome and see whether it's good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, and we alter what is going in so that we, for example, I'll just give you a very simple example. Let's say I read a book, for example, right? So there's something in the book. So I read that and said, okay, this looks pretty good. And I try to implement that. After I implement it, I look at the output and I realize that there's some mistakes in that book. There may be good parts, but there also be some parts that are not actually true. So I realize that and I take that. So next time I read that same book, I'm going to take away those parts that I know are not correct, right? So we subtract that away. So that calibration, that feedback happens all the time in life. We do this all the time. That's the learning process. That's how we learn. That's how our potential goes up, isn't it? So if you look at what is happening to that thing, there are 3 different stages, right? One is what we refer to as Annamaya Kosha. That's what I have written down here. Let me bring this back up here. So here, notice, this is Annamaya Kosha. This is what we refer to as Pranamaya Kosha, and this is what we refer to as Manomaya Kosha. And these 3 layers, if you will, in our Sharira, in this being, in this body, the outermost is the physical. So the first one is the physical. For example, if I read something, It's with this eyes, these physical eyes. I'm looking at an image, that image is going in. If I'm listening to something, the sound waves are coming in. So it's the physical aspect that's the first part, right? Once that physical aspect comes in, then at the next level is the energy layer. That's what we refer to as the pranamaya kosha. That energy level, see, that is where amplification has to happen. Just like here, in this particular case, most of the amplification actually happens here, not here. We focus so much on the physical layer, but actually it's the energy layer where amplification happens, right? So if you want to do sadhana, if you want to accomplish something, that accomplishment actually happens, it increases a lot in the energy layer, in the pranamaya kosha, not in the annamaya kosha or the physical layer, right? So a lot of that gets expanded, if you will, or amplified in that energy layer, and then it goes to the manomaya kosha, the mental layer. So it's in the mind we decide what to do, isn't it? So the mind itself, the potential is not increased in the mind, but all the mind does is it increases, like just in a circuit, it increases the current, right? So similarly, the mind, what it will do, it will take this potential that was created in the pranamaya kosha, and it will translate that as an interface. It's just an interface to the outside world. Because whether it's thought, action, speech, whatever it may be that you're doing, it's your mind that is dictating that. Not the energy layer, it's the mind, it's the mental layer that is saying, oh, let's go do this. Let's decide on this. This is where we decide what to do and so on. Right? So that last stage here, like I said, the potential here does not increase. Matter of fact, it may drop a little bit. But what it does do, that is where the action happens. Important question is this. One of the things here, and electronics people will understand what I'm going to say, so if there is any capacitance across this is very important, right? Pay attention to what I'm going to say. If there's any capacitance across the pranamaya kosha, it so happens, I'm not going to explain this in this short video, electronics people will know there's something we refer to as a Miller effect. This capacitance actually at this point looks like an equivalent of a much, much bigger capacitance. Matter of fact, that capacitance looks like this A2 times bigger. So if you have a lot of gain here, the equivalent capacitance looks much bigger. This capacitance, that what we're talking about, is what we refer to as tamasic energy. Okay. Now, the last thing, this is what we refer to as a load. What is it driving? So what is the purpose of all this? At the end of the day, what's my purpose in whatever so-called sadhana that I do? If that thing is negative, it's tamasic. When does it become tamasic? Well, when I'm the only beneficiary. If I'm the only beneficiary, then the output, my only goal is to gather, grab everything and keep it for myself. That's what's going to happen. Now, that little capacitor, remember, across that pranamaya kosha, so let's translate that to human thing, right? So I get all this information. So when I have two of these things, actually, you can think of one as an input, the other one as a feedback mechanism. That's where the feedback is coming in, right? Whether it's ears, whatever, right? So for the system to work well, if it has to work well, we actually need, you can manage with one eye or one ear and so on, you can manage, but the system is not designed for just one. It is actually designed for both of these things in place. So energy wise, what is happening is there's a feedback going in through one, let's say the left eye, and actually input is going to the right eye. So the feedback, the fed back energy I'm talking about, the feedback energy is getting subtracted from what the energy is there in the input that's coming in. The difference is what gets amplified. Again, I'm talking about energy. So the potential increases in the annamaya kosha, but it's very small. It's not much. If we depend only on that, that's why you notice that, people keep on working. They do things lifelong, they work hard, all these things. But they notice that their potential did not increase much in life. They keep doing the same thing. They work very hard. They're pretty good at it too. They're not stupid people, but the potential did not increase. And the reason for that is that middle part, that energy layer. That is where the actual amplification of potential, your potential and my potential, that's where it actually increases. That is what I need to focus on. So if that amplification is very small, that energy layer is very compressed. And in the Vedic science, there are ways that teach us how to increase the prana shakti and so on. So if that energy amplification layer increases, what you notice is that a person with a lot of prana shakti, his or her potential increases a lot after the physical layer has done its part. So what comes out of that, you cannot directly use it in the real world. It doesn't work like that. So it has to go through the mind. So what this energy layer will do, it will actually feed that increased potential. So it gives that potential to the mind or the mental layer, not just the mind, but the mental layer. So all that mental layer does, it doesn't increase your potential at all. See, again, this is a a lot of people have this misconceptions, thinking that, with my mind increase, I think I can increase. I keep saying all the time, I've said this before, that intelligence is a very overrated virtue. And the reason for that is that you can think all you want, okay? Sit and do nothing but think all day long. How does it increase your potential? When was the last time you sat down, thought or worried about something for 10 days, and after 10 days you could do much more than you could on day one? Hardly ever, because that doesn't help you. It's not helping you. It is the pranamaya kosha that increases the potential, actually, right? But something I have to be very careful. I have to be extremely careful. Again, I'm not going to go into the engineering details because it doesn't belong in a general purpose video like this. But one thing that happens, we have to be careful. We have to be very careful between these two capacitors. Now, if you can get rid of the capacitor, okay, good for you, right? In other words, if I have no selfish interest, I'm not going to gather anything from myself, good for you. This not there, that's not there. Okay, good for you. No issues. But on the other hand, all of us have some personal thing. All of us want something for ourselves, right? So if this thing is very small, very, very small, I don't even need this. It's going to be a very stable system. Very stable system. But as this increases, this also increases. Ask any electronics engineer, he'll tell you that this needs to go to 1/5 of this to make it stable, right? So if I put this thing, even if it's not there, I go intentionally add that. The only reason I add that is because this stupid thing is there at the output. So if I take this thing the way, I don't need this, right? Which means that if the outcome is selfish, unfortunately, you need to make that energy layer also a little bit selfish. Otherwise, the system won't work. So what you find in people who are totally engrossed with themselves and their well-being, blah, 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 all they do is think about themselves all the time, they'll notice that in their energy layer also, across that thing, there's a little bit of that self-centeredness in the energy layer. If only we can remove this. And the only way to remove this is to remove this, right? So if we can get rid of that, and I understand that the potential increase is actually happening in this energy layer, not in the physical, not in the mental, but in this energy layer. If I really want to do sadhana in life, that's what I need to focus on. I need to focus on the energy part, not the physical, not the mental. But just like this, what we call an operational amplifier, by the way, this whole thing put together, right? I cannot have a working operational amplifier if the first one and the last one is missing. It doesn't work. I need all three parts. Similarly, for me to function, for me to do any sadhana, I need the physical thing in good shape. I need the mental thing also in good shape. The mind, the mental layer has to be in good shape, the physical layer has to be in good shape. But the thing that increases the potential, I'll repeat one last time before I keep quiet. The thing that increases the potential is actually in the energy layer. So whatever we can do to increase that, you'll find that whatever you do in life, it doesn't matter. You'll accomplish a lot in life, right? And try that. If you try that for a month, 2 months, 6 months, whatever, you'll find that this is actually true. And to make sure that the system is stable, and it doesn't oscillate, life doesn't go crazy for you, and so on. One important thing I need to focus on is, at the end of it all, what is the end point, what's the outcome I'm looking for in this so-called sadhana. This thing should not be there, right? So it should not be anything self-centered, anything selfish. Then automatically, if you remove this, you can remove this. Okay, if you remove these two things, then what you find is that this thing, and focus on this, you increase that, you'll find that your potential, your ability to make things happen, your ability to affect things goes up tremendously. And that is my electronics analogy to explain what actually sadhana is in life.